Hello, everyone. My name is Jared Altick, and I'm a chaplain with the police department. The Hey Chaplain podcast brings you stories and wisdom about life in law enforcement, giving support and encouragement to those who wear the badge. Helping others may be the calling on your life, but it comes at a cost. There's a condition called compassion fatigue, sometimes called secondary traumatization, where the emotional strain of working with those who have been traumatized begins to accumulate and affect our health. Basically, helping others builds up a residue, which, if not dealt with in a healthy way, can hurt the helper. Today we're talking to Richard Hartman, who is the lead chaplain at the Fort Wayne Police Department. He discusses his role there supporting officers and as the pastor of Epiphany Lutheran Church in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and how, after years of active service, compassion fatigue set in. Listen to how it affected him and how he describes the physical and emotional symptoms. Chaplain Hartman is a good example of someone who overcame compassion fatigue, but make sure you note how long it took and the many ways that you can battle this condition before it becomes a health crisis for you. Here's Richard Hartman. Hello, Richard.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you today?
I am doing great.
Fantastic. So I want to talk to you today about compassion fatigue and some related issues. But first, I would love to hear about your role as chaplain. What does being a chaplain look like for you?
Well, being a chaplain I'll start actually from how it started into the process.
Excellent.
I have a number of neighbors that are in law enforcement, and I had come from being the president of a local charity organization and had just finished serving 6 years on that board and was really looking forward to the idea of not having to do all those meetings and things to that effect. And my neighbors were sitting there going, we need to actually talk with you about different issues. And we became really good friends. And the joke was always that they would call me up and say, hey, Richard, I need fence time with you, which was code word kind of like doing tool time.
Right.
They came to the fence and we looked over each other and talked and solved the world problems. Then they went, you'd be really good as a law enforcement chaplain. You really need to do this. And I was going, no, I don't. I don't need another hole in my head. I have enough things. And I'd like to actually, just kind of sit back and just kind of go, I can breathe for a moment kind of thing. And to make a long story short, in about 6 months after that, I became sworn in as a law enforcement chaplain with the Fort Wayne Police Department, which was now over 10 years ago. And 5 years ago, I became the lead chaplain of the Fort Wayne Police Department. And it's one of those things that where all of a sudden I found that I have a real passion for where those law enforcement officers are. And I joke with them a lot that they are in law enforcement and I'm in law and gospel along the way there.
Yeah.
And what that translates is that they have to enforce the laws and I can actually show grace and mercy in the process there along the way. And we laugh about that a lot in things. But the reality of it is that being a clergy person and being in law enforcement, you really are talking about a lot of parallels in what you do. And it's really been one of those things of where I really kind of found that talking with those officers and supporting them and their families is one of those passions that I found that really fills my heart. And it's a great thing back into the community, having been an Eagle Scout in the Boy Scout organization and always wanting to do service projects. It was a way of giving something back to a community that has given to my wife and I and our 3 kids and their extended families and things so much great gifts, as well as an opportunity to just really say thankful to God that we have been placed where we're at.
Oh, fantastic. Now, do you in Fort Wayne have a lot of opportunity to help with the victims of crime, or are you just focused on the officers?
Yes and no. In the Fort Wayne Police Department, we are really blessed in that our chaplains, the first line of operation is to our officers, their families, and the administration. And so we can really get to have some relationships with them, build those relationships, build the trust with not only our officers, but with their families and the administration as well. And that really, over the years, has developed into a very, very strong bond that they will talk to me about a lot of things where that's at. And then in our Fort Wayne Police Department, we also have a victims assistance group. And that group, their first response is actually to the victims and their families, and then to the law enforcement community. So we parallel a lot in what we do together, and we're actually called out to the scenes and actually complement one another, because we'll also help with those community relations as well.
Sure. Yeah, chaplains can sometimes find themselves wearing multiple hats.
Yes.
Dealing with the victims of crime, dealing with the public, and then dealing with the law enforcement officers. And so tell me more about being a chaplain with the law enforcement officers. You do ride-alongs, you interact with their families to some degree. Tell me more about that.
Sure. One of the things that actually has been a real blessing is it starts almost from day one with our recruitment classes in the academy. I personally teach 4 different classes in their curriculum that they have of 26 weeks. And so I do everything from doing an introduction to what chaplaincy is about, to how to do death notifications, to do crisis intervention. And then I also work very closely with our peer-to-peer group too, which is officers to support other officers in those traumatic events. We also do an annual company picnic, but it's for the department and all of their families and the retired officers as well, because we really keep contact in where those retirement officers are at as well.
Excellent.
And so we get to have a chance to really to talk with them and to really interact at that point in time. Then the other part of it is that we do weddings and baptisms and things to that effect. And if those faith traditions are there with you, matter of fact, one of the things that I really am very thankful for, I have one particular officer that has 3 kids, and I've presided at all 3 of his kids' weddings and things, because they were like, I don't want anybody else but Chaplain Hartman. I want him to be doing this. And that's been a real blessing that I can't even put into words how close that part really is and the relationship that happens with that. But the other part of it with it is that, when we have some crisis there with things like funerals and things, it's really kind of a blessing, because those officers have developed that relationship with you, not only as a colleague in doing what we're doing, but also as a place of which that they can find some solace and strength in the midst of where those struggles are, even in their own personal life.
Yeah. And that's a tremendous investment in these officers, to be there for them pastorally, to be an encouragement, to help when the department is dealing with things like death and crisis and tragedy, to be that steady hand and calming force, to be alongside the officers when they're actually on the street. All of those things are tremendously important, but they do come at a cost. And so can you tell me about your experience with compassion fatigue?
Sure. It was really interesting in that all of a sudden, following the pandemic, which came in to our area in March of 2020 or 2019, and the thing about it is that I really didn't even recognize that I even was having compassion fatigue kind of symptoms along the way, which is it kind of sneaks up on you. You start to almost think like, well, I'm just tired. If I could just get a good night's sleep, I would be okay. Or if I could just have a chance to just catch my breath, I would be all right. If I could turn off my phone so that it wasn't ringing all the time, or if it wasn't texting all the time, or if I could just not go into the office for a few hours, I would be okay. I'll be all right. And it's all of those things. And then when you're called out to the scenes and helping people in those crisis modes there, I mean, we're the presence of God in the midst of crisis of where those people are at. And every time that those lights and siren go on, or you're called into the scene of a homicide or an accident or any kind of domestic dispute and things. It's a crisis. It's a crisis for them. And the thing about it is that they start piling up on top of you is what happens.
Yeah.
And then you start feeling like, oh my gosh. And those chapters and those steps just start constantly adding on top of each other instead of dealing with them and taking them off of your chart and just letting them go.
Yeah.
And pretty soon you start getting to the point of where you have no energy even to get up in the morning. You have no energy to talk with people. I think the thing that scared me the most is that I was actually doing a funeral for one of our officers that had died. And I'm with the family and things. And that was when our regulations, only immediate family were able to be at the funeral for the actual service itself. And so there was only like maybe 15, 20 people there. Mm-hmm. But the problem is that my weekly worship service, which would normally have about 150 people in it, was 6. That was my immediate family and my administration and things to that effect here at the church that were operating all the equipment.
Yeah.
And I found myself at that funeral, literally, I'm not kidding, walking up to people and feeling in my head, just stand still for just a minute so I can suck some energy out of you. Because I was so tired and wasn't able to figure out what was going on. And then I was online with a clinical psychologist that was talking to a group of us. She actually asked a question. So which one of you is the Energizer Bunny? Is always the Johnny on the spot that's willing to do anything, that's really out there going. And all of my colleagues literally threw me under the bus. And she goes, okay, so let's talk about this. So she started talking with me. In about 30 minutes, conversation passed, and I didn't even realize that it had taken that long. She then says to me, you realize that you have a clinical diagnosis of compassion fatigue. And I went, no, I don't. That's not an issue. And she goes, yes, it is, because you're doing that, which was tired, lethargic, not wanting to talk to people when I normally talk to people, not wanting to reach out. I was tired, literally wanting to sleep, falling asleep, even in my office and things to that effect.
Yeah.
And when people would ask about it, I would totally deny it, that it was not even there. Sound familiar? Like some other issues that kind of come along with us and things to that effect?
Yeah.
And so she actually then informed me, she goes, the good news is that it is, you can actually recover from this. Bad news is you're probably not looking at least Christmas of next year before you're actually going to be able to do that, because you need people to get that out of the system. And I was like, well, thank you very much, because I was always taught that if you could name the psychological problem, that was 90% of the battle. And I was like, I already did it.
Yeah.
And she goes, well, the problem is that the cure is not going to happen for quite a while here because of this pandemic. And it literally took me, I'm not kidding, because here we are in March of 2022. And it wasn't until Christmas time of 2021 that I actually started feeling the energy coming back in my life.
Yeah. Yeah. So
that was over a year and a half before I could actually take care of helping that scenario there, so that I wasn't just totally exhausted every time I turned around. And the thing about it is that when I actually started recovering from it, even my wife went, I knew something was wrong. I didn't know how to help you. And she's in the medical profession herself. And she was just like, now that I see it, now I actually understand a little bit more when people are talking about what that compassion fatigue is, because it was such a subtleness that was coming on. And we get wrapped up into it that we just think, well, I'll take this and I'll get better here in a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, the problem is you don't, is the issue. And the other part of it with it is that it just stacks up. It layers on top of each other. And so one of the things that we have started to do actually in the Fort Wayne Police Department with our chaplains is that when they go out on a call, they must, following that call a fellow chaplain to diffuse immediately on the way home, so that way you're not taking all that home with you.
Yeah, that's really good. That's really good, because I've heard people describe law enforcement as being a trash can where every dysfunctional family and antisocial behavior and everything gets dumped into that police officer. All the garbage gets dumped there. Well, then a chaplain can come along, and all of the individual trash cans that are the police officers, they can dump their garbage into the chaplain.
Right.
But then the chaplain turns around, and there's not sometimes anywhere to go with that.
Right.
They just have to eat it, Right. And some of these chaplains are incredible, and they're very resilient and have a lot of really healthy coping mechanisms and everything else. But ultimately, there's nowhere to go with that stuff, and it builds up and builds up. And this is the compassion fatigue you're describing, right?
That's exactly it. What you just described is a perfect prescription for failure.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is everything that's written on there. And if I also tell fellow chaplains too, this is called self-care for pastoral care and chaplaincy along the way there with that. Because the reality of it is that nobody else is going to care about what happens to us unless we can figure out a way to help ourselves here to get that self-care.
Yeah.
Because the reality of it is that none of us really thinks that we need to have that we all have a giant S underneath our shirts and things to say super chaplains, and things to that effect along the way. When the reality of it is that we're human beings just like everybody else. And we also get sick. We also have compassion problems. We also suffer from emotions and everything else.
Yeah.
And when we're in those crisis scenes there, we're the presence of God in the midst of real struggle of what life and death is all about.
Yeah.
And when you see that often enough, it can't help but pile up on top of you there. And as I tell our officers, they're in the front lines of good and evil out there. And if they're not there, then we are really in trouble as a society. And as chaplains, if we're not out there, we're not supporting them, and they can also have some real issues there that they don't even know that they have those issues, because they just are always taught, well, you just buck up, dude, and deal with that later. Well, the problem with it is you do that long enough and you just really don't care. And that's where the sarcasm starts to happen there with
cynicism.
And the cynicism that's there.
Yeah.
I mean, we talk about oftentimes that it's, the cop humor and things to that effect, but sometimes that cop humor gives you an insight of how harsh and how hard they've had to deal with issues that no one else was listening to.
Oh, yes. Oh, someone who is a counselor or an analyst could listen to cops tell jokes and learn so much. And most of it's harmless. Most of it's blown off steam. But every now and again, there's just a little bit of an edge, or it goes just a little bit further than what a healthy joke would go. And you're like, okay, there's a story here. And and as a chaplain, I see that as like, okay, now I want to pay some extra attention here and see if I can help.
Exactly.
You don't always get invited in to do that help, but I see that, and I want to help, because some of those jokes and some of those snide remarks and, cynical comments about, oh, that's, the department or the county or whatever is, really bugging you. Sometimes those are kind of cries for help. Man, I really want some of this garbage out of the trash can. Right. And they feel it, and without maybe even using the terminology of compassion fatigue or burnout or anything like that.
Right.
They feel it. They know that it's not good, and maybe they don't know.
And it's not healthy.
Yeah, they don't know where to go with it. So what are some of the things we can do to prevent or recover from compassion fatigue?
Right. Well, one of the things that I just shared was that on our way homes from doing those calls and things to that effect with chaplains, we can talk to one another. One of the things that the clinical psychologists are telling us now is that we learn more and more about what our brains are doing and what they can't do, is that by verbalizing what's going on and telling the story of what happens, we can move it from our short-term memory to our long-term memory. And our short-term memory has a very finite amount of information that they can store, The long term has a much wider capability of being able to study and keep it in there and things to that effect. And so by verbalizing it, moves it from that short term memory to the long term memory. The other thing that I oftentimes tell, and clergy are just as guilty as officers too, look at what you're eating.
Yeah.
If you're eating healthy food, the chances of you being able to combat what things come across with you and things to that effect are much greater than if you do what I jokingly refer to as the run and stuff.
Yeah.
Which is that we run from one thing to the next and we quickly stuff food in knowing that we need to do that, but only taking whatever we can find and as quick as we can find it so that way we can move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
The problem with it is that if we actually are not watching what our food is, then there are other crisis things that start happening too. In this whole system of being diagnosed with compassion fatigue, I was also diagnosed as a type 2 diabetic. And what was really interesting is that the day that I was diagnosed as a type 2 diabetic, of the 20 chaplains that I was talking with here in northern Indiana, 16 of us within a week had been all diagnosed in the same way.
Really?
And I went, gee, do you think stress could have a little problem with that and things to that effect along the way? Yeah, it could.
Yeah. High stress, bad eating, bad habits. Yeah.
And so what are officers doing too? Well, in the Fort Wayne Police Department, when they hit the button on their laptop to send a report, within 3.2 minutes, they're off to the next scene that they're needing to take care of.
Yeah.
Well, you don't have any downtime with that either. And so consequently, you're just stacking it on top of each other. So we need to learn how to be able to unpack some of those things and to do that. And the way that I actually say it is that look at talking with one another, moving it from short term to long term. Look at your health with regards to your eating habits and what kinds of foods you're eating. You know, I mean, we all had those nutrition classes when we were growing up and things with regards to that. But the reality of it is the majority of us, if we're honest with ourselves, are extremely high on complex carbohydrates, which is the breads and the grains, and potatoes and things to that effect, because they're cheaper and they're faster to do and things. Well, sometimes we need to really looking at healthier foods along the way. The second thing is do exercise. Okay, as law enforcement officers, you know you're supposed to stay up with your PT and things to that effect. As clergy, you know you're also supposed to keep up a healthier diet and exercise as well. Well, the only problem with it is that we're running so hard and so strong that we need to be like Men in Black, where they had that 32-hour day and things to that effect. Because when you add everything together, it comes up to more than 24 hours. I always laugh, in the denomination where I'm at, they had this health wheel that we were supposed to follow with all these different spokes, from finances to diet to exercise and things and study and things to that effect. Well, if you added it all together, it came up to 29 hours. Yeah. And I went, how is that possible in a 24-hour period of time? Yeah. Well, the thing about it is that what we need to do is that I'm not saying that we need to do an hour of exercise every day, but you need to do at least 20 to 30 minutes. The American Heart Association says at least 2 or 3 times a day. And you can do it as simple as just walking. Yeah. That's all you have to do. It's not that you have to go out to the weight room and lift 250 pounds 27 times and then run a mile and a half and things. When I look at that, that's insurmountable. I mean, I can't go over that kind of a mountain peak and things to that effect, but I can do 15 to 20 minutes a couple of times a day, walking in the church or walking outside on the sidewalk and things to that effect.
How else did your health change over that year and a half?
Yeah. Well, I had an A1C of 9.1. And that's not good. I mean, you need it to be like 5 and 6 is where you need to be, or 7 is the high ones where you start to worry. That's called pre-diabetic and things to that effect along the way. And I am able to report back that in the last 18 months, my A1C has been 5.0. And so that's a really good one. My blood pressure, which has always been a problem for me ever since I was an adult at 21 when I was diagnosed as being hypertensive, because of looking at my health and doing other things to make sure that I stay healthy. I am happy to report that my blood pressure has now dropped to 110/70.
Oh, wow. Excellent.
I've lost 85 pounds in
wow.
that same time period there.
Wow. God bless you.
My stamina to walking with those officers when we're called to those crisis scenes and when we're out and about, I can stay right up, even with, I'm 60 years old and I can stay up with those 23-year-olds that are just graduated from the academy. Now, I can't run with them when they're doing that. I look at that and just go, you go, big boy. I'm going to follow behind you in the car, okay? But I can walk with them and stay up with them. And I'm not nearly as tired as what I used to be and things to that effect. And probably the thing that's helped me the most, and I give credit where credit is due, this is from my wife here, okay, which is that we routinely take vacation time at least every 3 months.
Yeah.
Where we get away for at least 2 or 3 or 4 more days. And what happens is during that time period, I literally turn my entire phone totally off, not just put it on vibrate, but turn it off, because I need to be able to separate from where that's at and to focus on that relationship that's really important to me with my wife and family.
Yeah. Yeah. This has been fascinating. I think that of all the different things that I look at, whether it's suicide prevention or different types of crisis management and whatever else, a lot of these things I learn to help others. And I think, alcohol dependency or something like that, that's not really relevant to me personally.
Right.
But compassion fatigue, that kind of emotional burden and feeling burned out about that's something I identify with. That's something I think has affected my health in the past. When I adopt some of these healthier things where I lose weight and I'm exercising, I'm getting out in the sunlight, I'm eating well and doing things like that, I can see in myself that I'm doing better and I have more capacity to help. And the lie that I always believe is that, well, I don't have time to take care of myself because I'm busy taking care of others. And that is a critical misunderstanding, isn't it?
Yes. I mean, that is the biggest farce that's out there, because the reality of it is that if you don't take care of yourself, your bucket is going to get totally empty and you can't help anybody, not only yourself, but you can't help others there along the way, which we, as caregivers, we all want to help others. That's what we got into this for. And even law enforcement officers, if they really break it down to what's really important for them, it's making sure that law and order is there and that people are taken care of.
Yeah. You have to have the attitude of the oxygen mask in the airplane. You need to put it on yourself first so that you can help others put theirs on. You can't be running around helping every child put theirs on, because then you're going to pass out and then you can't help anybody.
Correct. So, I guess the best one that happened for me, I was just doing a ride along yesterday with one of our officers, and he hadn't seen me for about the last 3 months, actually in person. I mean, I've talked to him on the phone a couple of different times, but that was the first time he'd actually seen me. And as I said, I've lost 82 pounds since a year ago, September. So that's a pretty sizable chunk of weight there along the way. And the first thing he asked me was, "Hey, Chaplain, are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah, why?" And he goes, "Because you've lost all this weight. Is your health okay?" And seeing the thing about it is that when we notice and we actually feel comfortable enough to be able to talk to one another like that, that's really important too. And it gave me an opportunity to kind of talk about what had transitioned in my life. And don't be afraid about it. Just admit we're at there along the way there too. I mean, because we all can learn from one another in that process too.
Yeah. Yeah. No, this is fantastic. Thank you so much for helping me with this and explaining and telling us your story. That's been really valuable.
Can you tell us one of my passions there now?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, everybody in law enforcement needs to get healthier. There's so many things in our complex lives, where we're not paying attention to them very well, and they can kind of get out of control. And we need to come back and get that squared away so that we can be healthier to help others.
Yeah, very good. Yeah. Yes, I totally agree to that. Yep.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your time there. And if you need something else, if you want to just call me up, we can talk about a lot of different things sometimes. So
that's
just
fantastic.
Kind of keep me in your back pocket there for you, okay?
Thank you. I'll do that. I'm so thankful I got to talk to Chaplain Hartman. This all came about because of the recommendation of another chaplain, Jeff Wolf from Indianapolis. Jeff is a friend of mine who recommended both the topic and the guest, and I'm so grateful because Chaplain Hartman had a lot to offer. He's full of energy, enthusiastic about chaplaincy, and really knowledgeable with firsthand experience on this topic of compassion fatigue. Whether you're a chaplain or a police officer, or maybe in a different field altogether, please take this information to heart before your role as a helper begins to hurt you in serious ways. We need to find a place to verbalize the trauma that we've been exposed to. We need to eat better and exercise more. And we need to find ways to rest. We can't save the world single-handedly. And if we get taken out of the game due to injury, then we can't help at all. Ultimately, we need to learn to treat ourselves at least as well as we would treat the people that we take care of. If you like what you heard here, please share this episode with a cop or someone who loves a cop. On the next episode of Hey Chaplain.
And I was assigned to the travel team for, then the Secretary of Defense was Robert Gates. So for that year, all I did was travel in advance of wherever the Secretary was going to be and set up the security. Then when he landed, the team there, we would pick him up and provide, protection for him wherever he was at, and then he would leave and go to the next place. That was a lot of fun because I went to a dozen different countries.
Sure.
And got to see all kinds of things that you wouldn't get to see. High-level meetings, lots of dignitaries from other countries because that's where he was traveling. And
right.
That was a very enjoyable job, but it was a year away from the family, and so that part was hard.
The views expressed here are the personal views of the host and our guest and do not necessarily represent the views of any law enforcement agency or its components. Thank you for listening today, and as always, pray for peace in our city.